Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into the fascinating and sometimes kind of weird ways our brains take shortcuts. We're going to see how these automatic behaviors work and, more importantly, how they can be triggered to influence our decisions without us even realizing it. Okay, so let's kick things off with a real head-scratcher. This story comes from a jewelry store in Arizona, where a bunch of turquoise jewelry just would not sell. But what happened next? Well, it seems to defy all logic. You've got to picture this. The pieces were good, the prices were totally fair, and the store was jam-packed with tourists. You'd think this stuff would be flying off the shelves, right? But nothing. She tried moving it to a better display, had her staff really push it, zero. The jewelry just sat there collecting dust. So finally, she's just had it. She's about to leave on a trip and basically throws in the towel. Before heading out, she scribbles this quick, frustrated note to her saleswoman, hoping to just get rid of the stuff, even if it means losing money. But this is where the story gets really weird. The employee couldn't quite make out the messy handwriting. She sees the X and the number, but she mistakes the 1/2 for a 2. So instead of slashing the prices, she doubles every single one of them. And the result, get this, every single piece sold out. The whole collection was gone within days. So what on earth happened? How does that even make sense? To figure this out, we need to take a pretty surprising detour. And that detour, believe it or not, takes us into the world of mother turkeys. Yeah, you heard me right. Turns out their behavior holds the key to unlocking this whole jewelry store mystery. Okay, so mother turkeys are great moms. They're loving, they're super protective, they're always looking out for their babies. But here's the crazy part. Almost all of that complex maternal behavior is triggered by one single simple thing, the cheep-cheep sound of a baby chick. Now, scientists prove this in a pretty wild experiment. A polecat is a turkey's mortal enemy. When they pulled a stuffed polecat toward a mother turkey, she went ballistic, attacked it viciously. But then they put a little recorder inside that same stuffed enemy, playing that cheep-cheep sound. And her reaction? A complete 180. She actually gathered the stuffed predator under her wing as if it were her own child. So the people who study animal behavior, ethologists, they have a name for this. It's called a fixed action pattern. You can think of it like a cassette tape of behaviors that's pre-programmed inside the animal. It just plays automatically when the right button gets pushed. And it all boils down to this really simple idea. Click, whirr. The cheep-cheep sound is the click. It's the trigger that pushes play on the tape. And all that mothering behavior? That's the whirr. The tape playing out automatically, no questions asked. It's easy to kind of chuckle at the turkey, right? But before we get too high and mighty, guess what? We humans are running on very similar pre-programmed tapes all the time. Let's look at a classic experiment from Harvard psychologist Ellen Langer. All she did was have someone try to cut in line for a busy library copy machine by asking a very simple favor. And the results are just wow. They perfectly show our own click-whirr response. When the person just asked to cut, about 60% of people said yes. When they gave a real reason, because I'm in a rush, it shot up to 94%. No surprise there. But look at this last one. When they gave a totally bogus reason, because I have to make copies, which, everyone in line needs to do, 93% still said yes. The trigger wasn't the logic of the reason, it was just the word because. Click, whirr. And this brings us right back to that turquoise jewelry. Those buyers were mostly tourists. They weren't turquoise experts. So they fell back on a mental shortcut, a rule of thumb they've learned over a lifetime. Expensive equals good. That higher price tag became the trigger, the click, for quality. Whirr, they bought everything. But here's the thing. These shortcuts aren't some kind of bug in our programming. They're actually a feature. I mean, our world is unbelievably complex. We couldn't possibly stop and analyze every single decision we make. These automatic tapes are what let us get through the day without our brains completely short-circuiting. But, and there's always a but, these shortcuts also make us vulnerable. They can be exploited by people who know how they work. And this brings us to a really powerful tool of influence that plays on these automatic responses, the contrast principle. The idea is actually really simple. Our brains don't judge things in a vacuum. We judge them based on what came right before. You know, if you pick up something light and then pick up something heavy, the heavy thing feels even heavier than it actually is. Well, that same principle applies to everything, especially price. Clothing stores are absolute masters of this. Salespeople are trained to sell you the most expensive item first. Why? Because after you've just mentally committed to spending, say, $500 on a suit, a $95 sweater suddenly seems like no big deal. It feels cheap by comparison. If they showed you that sweater first, you'd be a lot more likely to think twice about the price. And once you know about this, I promise you will see this tactic absolutely everywhere. Real estate agents will show you a couple of rundown, set-up houses before they show you the one they actually want you to buy. Car dealers get you to agree on the big price of the car before they start adding on all those little, seemingly insignificant options. So, just how powerful can this be? Let's wrap up with a true masterclass in using the contrast principle, and it comes from a very clever college student writing a letter home to her parents. The student, we'll call her Sharon, starts the letter by asking her parents to please sit down before reading. Then she just unloads this horrifying story about a fire in her dorm, jumping from a window, getting a skull fracture, then falling in love with a gas station attendant she moved in with. Oh, and she's pregnant and has an infection. Can you even imagine being her parents at that moment? Just sheer panic and terror. But then, after painting this absolutely disastrous picture, Sharon reveals that actually none of it is true.
And that is the punchline. Compared to a skull fracture and an unplanned pregnancy, a D and an F suddenly don't seem like the end of the world, do they? Sharon might be failing chemistry, but you have to admit she gets an A+ in psychology.
So what's the big takeaway here? These automatic shortcuts are click, whirr, tapes. They're essential. They help us navigate a complicated world, but they also create blind spots. They can be used to frame our perspective and guide our decisions in ways we don't even notice. And it really makes you stop and think, doesn't it? What little triggers are out there that make you say yes without even thinking about it?